I'm going to take you through an endgame Minion DPS and Thorns build that you can use on your Necromancer for high tier nightmare dungeons. At the end of this video, I'll also go through the key aspect and gear requirements that are a must to get the best out of this build. Now, going through the skill bar, the core skill that I'm using here is Blight. Now, I've taken the modifiers on this skill that slows enemies by 25% for a bit of crowd control. And then the second modifier is that my minions deal an increased 15% damage to enemies within the Blight. So the main use is support for your minions in terms of damage while slowing down your enemies. In terms of the defense skill, I'm using Blood Mist. This is just a key skill to have in order to give yourself something that can break CC and allow you to escape in the midst of battle when required, and can mean the difference between staying alive or dying at times. For curses, I've taken Iron Maiden, and this skill really complements the Thorns part of the build I'm using. Once enemies are inflicted with this curse, they take damage each time they deal indirect damage to you or your minions. The modifiers for this will mean it no longer costs essence to use and will actually give me essence back when I use the skill. And the final modifier will increase its damage by 20% as long as 3 enemies are inflicted by the curse. In terms of maximizing the amount of thorns you have and how much is transferred onto your minions, I'll cover this when I go through the gear and aspect requirements later in the video. For my ultimate skill, I've taken Army of the Dead. This provides me with a way to summon all my minions again if required without corpses. It also provides a great burst damage from your minions when you pair it with the Unyielding Commander's aspect, which means while Army of the Dead is active, your minions can gain up to 100% attack speed and take 90% reduced damage, which is just crazy when you pair the two together. For the remaining 2 skills I'm using, one is the Golem skill to allow it to be summoned. I'm using the Bone Golem, so its active skill will allow it to taunt enemies, which is another key part of this build. The final skill of Ray Skeleton will also be continually used in order to heal and buff your minion damage throughout all the battles. Now, going into the gameplay mechanics of how all this comes together, once you encounter a mob of enemies, the first thing you do is lay down your Iron Maiden curse. This now means that whenever the enemy deals direct damage, they're going to be taking damage from the Iron Maiden curse as well as continual damage from your Thorns. This can add up to some decent passive damage that will occur throughout the battle. Next, you should be firing Blight at as many enemies as possible in order to slow them down and give your minions the 15% damage buff. With the corpses being generated in the battle, you'll need to make sure you are consuming the corpses with Ray Skeleton, which is going to summon a Skeletal Priest, which will increase their damage by 20% and heal them for 10% life. This is a key skill to keep using every 5 seconds once in battle to maintain that 20% damage buff. You will also be getting essence whenever you consume a corpse, thanks to the Grim Harvest passive. Now, activating your Golem skill will be based upon the situation, but when you having issues with enemies targeting you too much and need some pressure taken off, then use the taunt ability on your Bone Golem. And in terms of Blood Mist, I will save this until you run into a situation that requires you to evade some damage or escape some CC. Another key part of survivability is that I'm getting life per kill from the 2-handed scythe I'm using. Finally, your ultimate can be used whenever you get into some larger battles to massively increase your damage output. Now, the use of these skills does not change much once you go into a boss fight in a dungeon. You will still be cursing them with Iron Maiden, using Blight to ensure you get the damage buff, and then ensuring you use Raised Skeleton on corpses to get the additional minion damage buff continuously. I also make sure I use my ultimate skill, Army of the Dead, straight up to make the boss take some massive damage. Then you just need to ensure you are dodging his attacks when required and keeping the minion damage buffs going until you have taken him down. As you can see, this build does a good job at taking down dungeon bosses pretty quickly. Now, going through the Book of the Dead, I've taken the skirmishers for the skeleton, and then for the buff I've taken the 1 additional skirmisher. Then going into the skeletal mages, I've chosen the ones that do cold damage, and then also the buff, which increases the essence you get for each primary attack they take. And then finally into the golem, I've taken Bone Golem, and then the buff that gives it additional health and it inherits more thorns. So I'm going to take you through my gear and aspects now. By no means do I have the best rolls on this gear, but I do have the aspects that you're going to want to run for this build. Now, in the helmet, I've got the every 10 seconds your cold skeleton mages cast a blizzard that deals damage and is also going to chill the enemies. Going onto to your chest plate, you're going to want to use Razor Plate, the ancestral unique chest. This is purely to gain the thorns that you're using that be on yourself and will also inherit to your minions. Going over to the gloves, I've got while Army of the Dead is active, your minions gain anywhere between 70 to 100% attack speed and take 90% reduced damage. On my pants, I gain 0.5% increased armor when I deal any form of damage, stacking up to 50% for some damage mitigation. Then on the boots, I've got increasing the maximum number of skeletal warriors by 2. And then for the weapon, I'm running a two-handed scythe in order to get the life on kill. And for the aspect, I'm running skeletons gain increased damage between 40 to 60% after being active for 10 seconds. Moving over to the amulet, I've got the maximum number of skeleton mages increased by 3 using the 50% buff that the amulet gets. On my first ring, I have each time one of my summoning minion damages an enemy, they gain anywhere between 10 to 14% attack speed up to 42% stacking. And then finally, the main ring that you'll want to be running for this build is the Ring of Mendelin, the ancestral unique ring. Now, this gets the aspect that when you have 7 or more minions, you're going to gain a lucky hit which has a 10% chance to empower all of your minions, causing the next attack from each to explode for, in this case, nearly 18,000 physical damage. Now that's going to be a key part of your build you'll want in order to produce the amount of damage you need. Now moving into the skill tree, you're going to want to put your first 2 skill points into any basic skill, as we won't be using that. It should unlock the next section. Now going over to your core skill, you want to put 5 ranks into Blight, then 1 into Enhanced Blight and 1 into Supernatural Blight, then 3 points into Huge Flesh passive before moving on to the next section. Now, in terms of your defense skill area, you're going to want to put 1 point into Blood Mist to unlock that for your skill bar, 3 points into Spiked Armor for some additional Thorns, and then 3 points into Skeletal Warrior Mastery to increase the damage and life of your Skeletal Warriors, and then 3 points into Grim Harvest, which will mean when you consume a corpse, you generate essence. 5 points into Iron Maiden, then into Enhanced Iron Maiden and Horrid Iron Maiden, before putting 1 point into Amplified Damage, and then 3 into Skeletal Mage Mastery, increasing their damage and life. Now, when you move into the next session, you want to pick up the Necrotic Carapace passive, which is going to help out with some Fortify going forward. And then into the ultimate skill area, you want to pick up Army of the Dead, Prime Army of the Dead, and Supreme Army of the Dead. 3 points into Golem Mastery, 3 points into Inspiring Leader, 3 into Hellbent Commander, 3 into Bonded in Essence, 3 into Death's Defense, and then moving over to your key passives, you want to pick up Kalen's Edict, which is going to buff your minion attack speed. Moving over into the Paragon section, so you're going to want to pick up the Mage Glyph and socket that into your first Paragon board to buff their damage. And then going into your second board, you want to unlock Cult Leader. This will be your main board for your minions. For damage and damage reduction, you're going to want to pick up every single rare node on this board in order to ensure you're buffing your minions as much as possible. In terms of the glyphs, I've socketed Dead Razor in here, which is going to help buff the 2 rare nodes that fall within its zone, which is damage reduction for your minions and increased damage for your minions. Then going into the third board, I've gone into Hulking Monstrosity, which is going to start unlocking buffs for your golem in terms of damage mitigation and damage. If you found this video useful and informative, please remember to hit the like and subscribe button.